part. But we're just going to give you a brief history of what ABA therapy is, and also the ethical concerns, but also, pros and negatives of the thing. Is everyone in the stream, by the way?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Everyone
also,
see
are we
my
going to be
little
recording this? Okay, thank you.
sick? Okay. Oh yeah, if anyone's uncomfortable with that, please let David know. Okay. So ABA therapy stands for Applied Behavior Analysis, the branch of psychology that is devoted to understanding and improving socially important human behavior. ABA therapy is walking through situations to try to correct autistic behavior, sometimes with reward and punishment systems. But this, we're going to mention this, but ABA therapy is a large amount of things. It started off very different than what it's practiced today, and even what it's practiced today, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. So it's a very wide group of things.
All right, so I'm going to give a brief overview of what the history of ABA is. And it really begins in 1970 when Lovis launched the Young Autism Project at the University of California, Los Angeles, with the aim of applying behaviorist methods to children with autism. It was very questionable, to say the least. An example that I found of what he had was he had children like hug each other and look people in the eyes for long periods of time, which can be very upsetting to children. A quote that we picked out from this article is early leaders in developing this, like Ivor Lovis, said that this therapy was to make autistic children normal. And as this went on, like 20 children with severe autism received 14 months of therapy as institution. And then in 1987, Lovis reported that these treatments were successful and that he spent 40 hours a week working with them. Oh, and that's
So is this me? Oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot about the color coding things.
You're so valid. I love you.
The origins of ABA. So part of the agenda was to make the child look as normal as possible by teaching behaviors such as hugging and looking someone in the eye. Wait. Yes. For a sustained period of time, which children with autism tend to avoid, making them visibly different. So it also discouraged stimming, and sometimes the therapist following Lovas's program slapped, shouted at, or even gave electrical shock to a child to dissuade one of these behaviors. So not a great origin story so far. The children had to repeat the drills day after day, hour after hour. Videos of these early exercises show therapists holding pieces of food to prompt the children to look at them, and then rewarding the children with morsels of food. The therapist would sit on one side of the table, the child on the other. Together they went through the scripted process to teach a given skill over and over until the child had mastered it. Despite its regimented nature, the therapy looked like a better alternative for parents than the institutionalization of their children faced. So, a few notes on these. Sort of on the first quote. That's kind of messed up to sort of treat children that you're treating like dogs. And the second one, I've heard a lot of critique for the ABA is when you're going through the scripted processes, it doesn't necessarily teach the child anything. It just teaches them how to do this specific script. And it can be very distressful for the child that if things go off the script, that they don't know what to do because they've been taught so heavily to do this script. But on the third quote, especially back when ABA was first becoming a thing, it was often for people, they found it better to do this than a lot of people would get institutionalized instead just for having autistic behaviors.
One thing I do want to quickly note before I move on to this that we forgot to include the slide is a lot of people who followed Lovis's methods of ABA adapted a lot of like very, very awful things into it, such as giving children like electrical shocks if they produce some of the wrong behaviors they didn't want them to, and other physical punishments. And so I definitely think that's something worth taking notes of. So ABA therapy kind of continued along for several years without getting too much public mention until around 2007. There was a series of ransom notes that started appearing around New York City. These were a part of like a provocative. Did you say something, Ron? I'm sorry.
No, I didn't. I think that was someone.
I don't know where I heard you then. These are part of a provocative ad campaign by the New York University of Child Study Center, which spread talk of ABA therapy. And the photo that we included is included in the ad campaign. It says, one second, "We have your son. We will make sure he will not be able to take care of himself or interact socially for as long as he lives. This is only the beginning." And it was signed autism. So this kind of got people starting about talking about how people talk about autism, and people started thinking more critically, like, maybe this is not the way we should talk about autism.
Yeah, this is not a great note.
Not a great one. Oh, you skipped over another note that they.
I thought it was the same one.
Yeah, no, this is another one. Yeah, they did quite a bit of these, and they're like all over the city. All right, you can skip to the next slide now. So, what are some of the bad things about ABA? ABA is based on a cruel premise of trying to make people with autism normal, and ABA bypasses the needs of autistic children in favor of achieving the goals of neurotypical parents. ABA has cornered the market in trying to get other types of therapies, often not covered by insurance. One thing that we talked about a little beforehand, just among the officers. We don't exactly remember the source on this, but it's hard to get funding for some of the other therapy, and not the same way it is to get funding for ABA. Do you remember exactly what it was, David?
We talked about this, and we figured out that source was a little bit faulty. So I think it's
okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry, I didn't remember. ABA therapy can be predatory to parents who might think that this is their.
Oh, can I input something?
I'll allow it.
Yeah, I think generally ABA therapy is just more visible and easy to access. I imagine it's more affordable. It was just like the specifics of like it's still often not funded by state governments. Like you can't like get it with your like insurance necessarily, but it's still like the most visible practice from what I'm aware of.
Yeah, that's a pretty fair description. So ABA is pretty predatory to parents who might think that this is their only hope for their child. This therapy is also only teaches the behaviors rather than helping them develop and understand the skills. Autistic children may also feel a lack of control over their autonomy. And also the effects of ABA are superficial to try to make the autistic person feel more acceptable, but not necessarily happier or more functional. So when we were researching this, one of the first things that we looked into was what other advocacy groups looked like. Well, there's some not that great autistic advocacy groups. One that such as Autism Speaks. One that we really like is the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, since it's run by actual autistic people. They have a quote on their website that says, "ABA has a predatory approach to parents." And a prominent, and then they also said, if you don't work with an ABA provider, your child has no hope. So that's interesting. And here's some quotes from someone who went through ABA. "The core problem with ABA is that the focus is placed on challenging behaviors to make an autistic child appear non-autistic, instead of trying to figure out why an individual is exhibiting a certain behavior. It's taken me a long time to not be ashamed of being autistic, and that only came because I got the chance to learn from other autistic people to be proud of who I am." These quotes kind of showed like the long-lasting impacts of ABA and how it is very harmful to how you view yourself.
Right. So the next thing that we want to talk about is the other's perspectives, because clearly ABA therapy is an extremely popular practice, and so there must be people out there who, genuinely believe in this and accept it despite the flaws it has. So first off, ABA is complicated. We can't just outright throw it out and say, oh, well, that's just something that we don't even have to think about, because one, it's no longer the one-size-fits-all program that it used to be, right? It used to be such a mess of forcing a bunch of children into these boxes and scaring them and shocking them and things like that. And while that still happens, while there are still some very damaging programs for autistic children that still exist today, there are other ABA therapy programs that are working to make it a more ethical and a more safe and friendly environment for the children. And I will keep going, and I'll go into that in more detail later. Hold on, go back to that. So the next point is many scientists agree that ABA therapy is ineffective for many of the people that it's used on. So there's evidence that while it may be effective for some people, it is not effective for everyone, even though it is still advertised that way by a lot of ABA therapists. ABA therapy is not always damaging. Many children come out of the program with neutral or positive memories of the experience. So so that oftentimes makes the arguments against ABA therapy weaker, because you have people who say, well, my child turned out just fine, or something similar. And I think that ideas like that can sometimes be harmful, because even if they're correct, there's still a lot of people who suffered because of the system. There is advocacy for limitations on ABA therapy, so that it's only done when necessary for the health and safety of the child, but there are still arguments for whether or not it's necessary ever. So these are some quotes from a parent whose child did benefit from ABA, and she says that it helped in ways that she could not, and especially in those first few years, she doesn't know where she would have been without the program. And when she heard all of the horror stories about ABA, she said, I would never do anything to hurt my child. This is what works for him, and I've seen it work. So there are many parents who have had this experience where they see it working for their child, and so whenever they hear someone go out and just start bashing it, insulting it, and throwing it to the ground, it can make them more resentful to changing their mindset than it does actually being helpful, right? Consider the individual and see what they've already considered. Ask questions rather than going into argument mode immediately, if that makes sense.
So this is sort of these are from the original ABA things. So from the quotes, it says, during the therapy, the children's inappropriate behaviors decreased. Appropriate behaviors such as speech, play, and social nonverbal behavior improved, according to Lovas's report. Some children began to spontaneously socialize and use language. Their intelligence quotients and IQs also improved during the treatment. There is evidence that ABA has been effective. The question is it worth the risk? And I'd also like to take a little note there that a lot of these traits are also things that autistic people value, but might not have been good for the child. However, maybe these are things that made their life easier as well. It's complicated.
One thing to say is allistic means someone who is not autistic. And that's what that phrase means. So one question is, why do people still seek ABA after they've heard all of the negative implications of it? So ABA is seen as the only option for developing solutions for aggressive and harmful behavior, especially in children, right? So some children with autism are violent enough for parents to reach for the most drastic of treatments, including medications that act as, quote, chemical straitjackets, right? Some parents are legitimately afraid of their children, and they see ABA therapy as the only way out. And so we want to talk about what can be done about this. So, Kat?
All right. So, what are the alternatives? Well, it's fairly simple. Accepting neurodivergence. Many autistic adults see neurodivergent behaviors as things they should embrace instead of correct. So, when it comes to advocating neurodiversity, this is a movement that is credit for being started by Judy Singer in the 1990s. It basically asserts disorders such as autism and ADHD are simply different neurotypes and not deficiencies that need to be fought. This is like the idea that people can benefit from having kids that learn and think differently, and you can benefit from learning and thinking different. Critiques that say neurodiversity is defined too broadly, that autism should be separate from dyslexia, bipolar, and Tourette's, etc.
Yeah, so, and those critiques are argued by some people, but I think that you'll find that there's benefits in broadening the net and finding a wider community to participate in the advocacy and in the solidarity, because while the different neurotypes are vastly different in how they affect us, they affect us. They all unify us in the fact that we are seen as different or outcast from the neurotypical society, right?
Yeah, that's why you see a lot of other groups like grouped together. Like, for example, being trans and being gay are two very different experiences, but they gain from combining the communities the same way that like different neurotypes can gain from combining communities.
Yeah,
Plus, a lot of that stuff's extremely comorbid.
exactly.
Yeah.
So the next thing I want to talk about is going back to the conversation on aggression. Again, one of the biggest arguments for ABA therapy is finding the source of aggression, right? Or is my child is super aggressive. I don't know why they're aggressive. I need it to stop, right? My child is breaking things. They're throwing things. They're hitting people. They are doing whatever, right? And so when you're working with any child, not just an autistic child, but just any child who is being violent and angry, the first thing to do is back away and find the source. More intervention, bringing them to multiple different therapies and bringing them to multiple different places can cause them more distress, right? They can be more stressed because of it. And all ABA does to solve aggression is sedate them and force them to bottle up their feelings. So someone who's a child who has problems with anger, who's going through ABA therapy, is just going to learn to hide their feelings, and it's going to solve the problem for the parents, but it's not going to solve the problem for the child, right? And one good quote I saw was, "Don't take away your child's voice, take away their suffering," right? So I want to move on to how do you find the source, right? And I'm going to share a couple links in chat to that are things that you might want to save and share with anyone who advocates for ABA therapy because their child or their cousin or whoever is aggressive and they don't know how to work past it. And the thing is that this isn't always for children. Sometimes people are just angry and they don't know how to handle their situation, and this can be a good set of questions for anyone of any age. I say children just because that is most commonly when things like this, exhibiting your emotions through anger outbursts happen mostly when you're a child. So that's why I'm focusing mostly on children, but again, this can happen in anyone. So the first thing you want to find is, are they being abused? Are, like, at home, at school, wherever? The second one is, do they feel safe communicating, right? Do they feel like they can say things to you or anyone? Do they feel safe communicating? Are they being heard? So when they do communicate with you, are you listening to them and understanding what they're saying and giving them giving them the time of day, basically? Are you treating them as competent, right? Are you assuming that they have something competent and worthwhile to say, and treating them as such? Are they comfortable sensory wise? Are you putting them in uncomfortable clothing? Are they just having trouble with sensory issues, and maybe they need some soundproof headphones, or maybe they just need some quiet time, some space alone, right? Are they allowed to say no? Are you pushing them to a position where they can't say no? Are they sad, anxious, or grieving, right? Are they allowed to follow their routine? Because sometimes the biggest cause for anger in children is not in autistic children is not being able to follow the routine that they have set for themselves. Maybe they have something that they like to do every morning, and their parent has decided that that is just not something that they should be doing, and that causes distress, right? Are they medically healthy? Bring them to a doctor. Make sure that they have all of their medicines and their stomach's not hurting or anything like that. And do they have privacy and free time? So all of these, again, are kind of focused on children, but I think that this is a good thing for y'all to know, so that you can talk about this with people, because this is something that if you're advocating for neurodivergence, you're going to have people say, well, my child is autistic and they are angry all the time and I need to calm them down. And you say, have you checked in with the child rather than just sending them to some therapy that's going to scare them into obeying?
So this is just a general, where we've reached the discussion part, especially if anyone has gone through ABA therapy or knows a little bit more about the ABA therapy, feel free to speak up now. But if you just some general discussion about it, is sort of what this slide is.
Should we have Jaden kick this off, or?
Yeah, I can. Amazing, that works out. I actually, I had an ABA therapist when I was younger. My parents got me one. Her name was Cindy, and honestly, I don't remember most of it. But the thing is, my experiences, my memories of it, range from neutral to positive generally. I don't really have any negative associations with the experience. So that's, why it's something that's kind of made me initially skeptical of the topic for a while. However, I wonder, it's something where I feel as though, in hindsight, after actually having the opportunity to engage with the neurodivergent community and talk to autistic people, like on our own terms, I think that, which I didn't really get much of an opportunity to do when I was younger, or at least never really searched it out. I wonder if, maybe the perspective of that highly impacted how I viewed autism and how I viewed myself in ways that were very fundamental to me and almost like unconsciously affecting at this point. Or maybe not. Maybe it was actually like a great experience. I do genuinely believe from all my memories that my therapist was very nice. She was cool. She was great. I got along with her well. She, treated me respectfully. But it's something where I don't know. And I feel like, regardless of my experience, I wonder if I still, have an issue with the fundamental angle that the practice tends to come at things from. But Yeah, I'd love to hear other people's experience.
So, just jumping off of that, one thing that really stood out to me whenever I was working on this presentation was I I think I think one of the frustrating things about uh, ABA therapy is uh, some of the people sometimes there's not a lot of evidence that ABA therapy necessarily works outside of the fact that the people who are going to ABA therapy are just uh, the therapists who are in ABA therapy are just good people who are good with children, and therefore the children feel more comfortable around them and are able to open up in ways that the parents wouldn't let them, right? And so sometimes the thing that worked in therapy was interacting with a nice person, not uh, not the practices that were used during that time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'd like to add, I think some of the base concept of the ABA, helping, because Kat was talking about it earlier, and I'd love for them to talk about it again. But like some of the more modern stuff is, just like walking through social situations and talking about like why things happen, etc. And I don't think those are necessarily bad things to learn and teach about, just walk through things. But I think where I have a lot of problems with ABA therapy is the intentions of it, of the intentional, you need to be corrected, you need to be changed. I think it's not bad to learn different behaviors and to understand, different behaviors, but shaming children for their behaviors, especially non-harmful ones, um, I think is very wrong, and it gives autistic children turn into autistic adults, and that they're left with that trauma and those feelings all for their life.
Yeah, I do really agree with what she said. I think the thing with ABA is, as we've gone along, ABA has drastically changed from what it used to, like what it was back when Love has started to what it is, what I'm learning about in class right now. I think I think ABA can be used fine. For example, like even small things like just like nodding down like what causes like people to like get upset and just seeing what you can do to like to avoid that can be used correctly in like the classroom and other settings. But I think the problem is a lot of the intention behind how ABA is used, and it's just also the history of ABA is quite gross, and it's hard to separate from that.
Yeah, because if you start off your therapy on electrocuting children, it's it's
Yeah.
hard to sort of move away from that.
Yeah, no. So there's definitely like, even when we're talking about like perfectly fine things in relation to ABA, whenever like my teachers mention it, I just kind of like get a little like nervous because I'm like, oh God, where are we going with this? Also, if you're nervous about speaking, you're more than welcome to just type out your feelings and like, and we can read them off, or we can respond to them just by you typing
Jory,
it.
Jory in the voice chat. But yeah, you can go ahead, Jory.
I see, yes. Oh, um, well, I have a bit of a weird perspective because my twin brother is autistic, and because we were twins, my parents kind of just put me with him when he was doing his therapy because he would get very upset if we were like we would both get very upset if we were separated, and also it's just easier to like okay, both the kids are together, and so I kind of would do some of the therapy with him, and it wasn't. I think part of the reason why my family still views ABA as a good thing is just because my brother was like we were put or he was put into the therapy when he was very young, and it was because my parents just wanted to find a way for him to stop. He would get like so frustrated with things that he would self-harm, and as that was a toddler, my parents were obviously terrified. And I like there are definitely good things that he got out of the therapy. However, there's other things that I only realized years later. Like he does not like the word autistic. He doesn't like hearing the word autistic. He likes like he was very excited in the most recent Power Ranger movie when there was a hero who was like him, but he didn't like the word autistic like being said about him. And I think the only reason that things ended up turning out okay is because my parents, and I heard my mom talking to my cousin who was about to have a baby about like, what happens if your kid's autistic? And my mom said that the only reason that they kept with it for that time and then quit and found different therapy later was because my parents had a rule over, hey, we will only do what works up until a point. A therapy may be effective, but if it's hurting our son, then there's no point to it. You know, if he ends up being like extremely nonverbal forever, that's fine, because the first goal is to make sure he is not hurting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the main reason they were like, okay, we'll try ABA now. This works good. We'll try something else instead, because there's the limit of as long as my kid isn't hurting.
Right. And I think that's a good perspective to have. I think it's interesting. That's a really I really appreciate that experience, and I want to thank you for sharing. I'm gonna jump into what Ryan said in the voice chat real quick. He said ABA seems overall ableist, but maybe well intentioned. I think the problem with ableism, just like with other isms, other types of bigotry and things like that, is a lot of it is out of ignorance, is out of they don't realize that they're doing something wrong, or that there is a problem with this, because if you think about it as from a neurotypical perspective, you're seeing your child doing something that most children don't do, and you want to stop it, and I feel like that's a natural instinct, is stop doing that. But and a lot of neurotypical people have trouble realizing that some of those things don't matter. Like, why should it matter if someone is waving their hands or something like that,
I wanted to sort of touch upon something that Jory said, because I think that story revolves a lot around, because this is such a normalized like therapy, and because there's not a lot of other options on the market right now. Like, people are very pressured into doing ABA because they think it's the only solution. And I think that is one of the biggest problems, is that a lot of these professionals who should know better are sort of locked into the system. I think that's definitely a problem, is that they need to find more and better solutions.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the big reasons why we wanted to have this presentation, is to express our thoughts on the solutions. Can you go to the next slide, Rowan?
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
So I wanted to talk about how we can advocate for alternatives, and what are some other alternatives that you've heard of, and maybe you want to share, or maybe just ideas that you had, or feelings that this presentation made you think about. I'd really love to hear some anything from the group. I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on this. Because I was speaking on the solutions that I found. I think a lot of it is simply there are other types of therapy, and a lot of them, like play therapy, is a very popular one, where you literally just you let the child play, and then you kind of talk to them, and that can really help with putting them into a safe environment where they feel comfortable expressing themselves and expressing their frustrations, because a lot of the times the issues that parents have with their children, aside from some of the cosmetic issues like hand flapping and things like that, some of the deeper seated issues, anger and things like that, can be solved just by making them feel comfortable and making them feel safe and making them feel heard.
I will say there is, I just want to address this for, a lot of things for how to deal with autism better. It starts, a lot in the classrooms, like teachers being more educated about how to deal with things. But there's always the issue of, one, parents being uneducated on what to do. But also, if you're an autistic kid from a low income family with both your parents working two jobs a day, like it's hard for you to maybe get the attention that you need to do this sort of stuff, and it might lead towards those parents going towards more extreme measures because they don't have the time to help at home. And that's sort of
I
an
also
interesting problem.
think that the problem is too is ABA is super predatory towards parents, not only in the way
Yes.
Rowan was describing, but also it's like a lot of times when children's get diagnosed with autism, the first thing they suggest to parents is ABA, and so they're like, oh well, this is a professional that they got to know what's best because I don't, and so it's very easy to fall into it that way.
Yes.
I'm dropping into the articles and info channel a couple of links to alternatives for ABA therapy, and it's specifically on dealing with aggression, and then just how you can actually work with autistic people to in a more healthy way. Jaden?
Oh, I just wanted to add for how can we advocate for this slide. I wanted to, I think some of the people from the Anthill last meeting will remember this, but I kind of wanted to read a quote from a book by Mark Fisher called Capitalist Realism that I think is pretty relevant here. Many of the teenagers I worked with had mental health problems or learning difficulties. For some context, by the way, Mark Fisher was a teacher in the UK for a long time. This book was written in 2009, which is, I think, largely why it doesn't use the language of neurodiversity, because it predates a lot of the discussion around that. But anyway, many of the teenagers I worked with had mental health problems or learning difficulties. Depression is endemic. It is the condition most dealt with by the National Health Service, which is, by the way, the UK's public health care service, and is afflicting people at increasingly younger ages. The number of students who have some variant of dyslexia is astonishing. It is not an exaggeration to say that being a teenager in late capitalist Britain is now close to being reclassified as a sickness. This pathologization, already forecloses any possibility of politicization. By privatizing these problems, treating them as if they were caused only by chemical imbalances in the individual's neurology and or by their family background, any question of social systemic causation is ruled out. I bring up this quote because I think that it's relevant here in terms of the way that I think ABA therapy may often respond to autism, in that I don't think that the voices of autistic people are really ever heard when it comes, and this is like I said earlier, all you ever really hear the perspective of are people who take a very sort of medically essential perspective on the origins of any kind of neurodivergence, as opposed to a perspective that and I think many other autistic people might hold, is that a lot of our problems are caused rather by the way that we are treated socially, like in society. So I think that it is very important that we be willing to advocate for our own issues, be unafraid to, politicize our struggle and our issues, and make sure that it's actually heard in mainstream fields, and especially in medical fields as well. because oftentimes autism and other neurodivergent diagnoses are treated very medically, especially from what I'm aware, ADHD, even when that's not necessarily the best way of going about it. So I think that, though it is important to look at how it's all like it's good, it's worth considering the short term of like or the here and now of how we can make ABA therapy more like less harmful for autistic people. It is heavily worth considering the perspective that it comes from is often fundamentally flawed, and that it should definitely be. I think that we need to make sure that our perspective is actually heard and taken into account, and we are able to, have more control over that. So that's my perspective. Sorry, that was a lot, but yeah. Hello?
Yeah. Anybody
I
else
think
have any
David-
Sorry, I
thoughts?
was mulling over that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
Oh,
we're...
jeez, I've been unmuted.
Oh, yeah, Hayden. I've been waiting for Hayden to speak.
Metallica, I'm sorry.
No, I didn't. We didn't hear you, so you're good.
I just thought you were... I just kept thinking that you were about to speak, Hayden.
And does anyone else have anything to add?
Anyone have any thoughts on this presentation? Any questions, maybe?
I think just that, like, I can't remember who made the point, but that oftentimes, like, any kind of therapy for autistic kids and autistic people in general is super expensive, and with ABA being presented as, like, the most, like, my parents had to take out several loans to get my brother therapy because they were determined, like, okay, well, we're gonna do literally everything that we can, and they only paid it off, I think, when my brother was 15. They called it my brother's name is Joseph, they called it the Joseph mortgage. But it's like, if there's any way to kind of make these therapies not only more available but also less expensive.
Yes. Yes. I mean, that goes for like all therapy. Yes.
There's a price cut because of the pandemic most insurances are giving significant discounts on therapy while we are in a pandemic, and so you might notice that your bill will go up once the pandemic ends. So that's fun.
I think it's also worth mentioning with that though, like in the selection that I read, like I said, like in the UK, which has a nationalized healthcare service, which provides mental health care service, they're still like, experiencing enormous issues. And I think that the way that we do healthcare in the United States absolutely 100% needs to be reformed. It's absolutely ridiculous that we're still like this far behind. But I think that we still need to consider that even, best case scenario regarding healthcare, there's a lot of very fundamental issues sociologically that lead to, our mental health crises that we face today in terms of, whether those be socially constructed or biological or whatever. I think that, there's a enormous amount of steps that need to be taken, I guess. But you're right.
Yeah, I'd love to hear thoughts from anyone else.